By now, many of you will be aware of the Spike TV series Deadliest Warrior. This has been a fairly popular and admittedly fairly fun to watch TV series. That said, it is widely understood that Deadliest Warrior is perhaps the biggest load of historical bullcrap that anyone has ever put together. Nonetheless, there are some people who are ardent and very passionate fans of the series. Understand though that Deadliest Warrior is at heart a fan fiction or a fantasy battle between two warriors who would never actually fight together. Now, the methodology behind Deadliest Warrior is to introduce a few experts, conduct a few tests using weapons, and then run a simulation using the data to determine which one is the deadliest warrior. There is a tremendous amount of material that can be ripped apart in the series, and to be honest, I will entertain the thought that this is entertainment. So there are many things I will look over, and there are probably fewer things that are right than there are completely wrong. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to examine in detail all the archery specific components of the Deadliest Warrior series across all 3 seasons. As I said earlier, the series is really a fantasy battle, so expect more of a pop culture reference rather than actual historical evidence. That said, I will, where possible, try to discuss the actual history and effectiveness of the bows and arrows used in these tests, as well as deconstruct the flaws and the blatant lies which are presented to make the show more entertaining. I will be covering every episode that involves a bow and arrow. I will largely be ignoring the crossbows because they do kind of fall outside my field of interest and expertise, so I'll only focus on bows and arrows. So, without further ado, let's see who is the deadliest era. I want to start by saying that the first episode is perhaps the least offensive of all the archery episodes. Now, one of the recurring issues with Deadliest Warrior is that the experts are often fake. The producers will bring in people who are stuntmen or personalities on radio or TV and dress them up to be experts. So the trash talking is an unfortunate, obnoxious side effect where these guys try their hardest to antagonize. Now, this particular expert, I think, is legit. He doesn't trash talk as much, he's a calmer person, and he seems to be the real thing. So, I think this particular demonstration doesn't need to be as dragged out as others we'll see later. The Apache expert firstly shoots several arrows through the chronograph. Then he demonstrates the lethality of the arrows by shooting a ton of arrows into the gel torso. Dr. Armandorin will then examine the torso and basically say these are kill shots. That's not very surprising. You are shooting arrows into an unprotected, unarmored target. So of course, most of these arrows will be lethal. I'm not sure what the purpose of this particular test was. If you're going to shoot a dozen arrows into a target, it's going to die. I mean, I can do that. On a side note, the show gives the bow the edge. Historically, yes, the bow was probably the more accurate and effective weapon. That said, the show tends to underrate the sling. In ancient times, slings actually outrange bows, and with the lead bullets, if not stones, the sling would be able to kill more directly through concussion rather than through bleeding from arrows. The simulated battles are perhaps the most fun part of the entire show. This particular fight isn't horrible, but it is heavily skewed against the Apache, though, spoiler alert, the Apache wins anyway. Now, this is perhaps the worst Apache I've ever seen. What happened to the 15 arrows per minute? This is an incredibly slow reflex. Now, I do understand that this is meant to be basically stage fighting. They can't actually shoot at each other, and the cuts are done so that it presents a narrative. So the technique isn't the best, but it's at least plausible. So I'm not going to say too much about the way this actor shoots. It makes the point. Ha, get it? And apart from that, it's a pretty mediocre shooting. I know there's a shield in the way, but it's an unarmored target. It shouldn't be that hard. So it's a little weak, but not horrible. We then go on to episode 2, perhaps one of the worst episodes in the entire series. Okay, the series has taken the BS level to 11. This is the prime example of a fake expert, if there ever was one. Now, if the title of Samurai Descendant wasn't already a trigger, who is this guy? Rather than being a true samurai expert, Tetsuro Shigematsu is a Canadian national born in England. According to his website, he is a comedian, filmmaker, and appeared on Deadliest Warrior to talk smack and kill Vikings. Now, this alone doesn't necessarily mean that he knows nothing about Japanese weapon history. After all, the well-known Lars Andersen is a Danish painter. But let's check his credentials as a Kyudo master.
Of Kyoto, Japanese.
Wait, what was that? That is how you would shoot an American flat bow, not a Japanese Yumi. There is nothing correct about this technique. This is never taught in Kyudo. This is correct Kyudo technique. Take note of the angle and position of the bow hand, the fact that a thumb draw is used with the arrow anchored very far back behind the ear and the arrow is resting on the right hand side of the bow. Meanwhile, Shigi uses the left side of the bow, anchors around its jaw, which is accurate for Western archery, but he uses a full 4-finger grip on the string, which is a novice mistake for any Western archer. Oh, come on, they're not even trying here. They do at least use the correct side of the bow, but he's using a 2-finger Mediterranean grip on a Japanese Yumi.
7-foot length gave it great firing power.
Firstly, firing power isn't a thing for a bow, and if it was, the length of the bow would have very little to do with it. Now, this arrow point appears very quickly during the transition. In freeze frame, you can see that it is a very intricate arrow. To my understanding, this is a Yanagiba, which is a willow leaf design. However, it was used for ceremonial purposes and a symbol of status. This particular arrow point has a very intricate design engraved into the arrow point. It's actually a hollow point, so it's cut right through the metal. I don't imagine this would have been used as a combat weapon. Another quick note is that the distance used for this test is marked as 45 feet, which is about 13 meters. That is not an impressive distance. The show does have a bad habit of adding extra sound effects to make weapons sound cooler, and that's one of them. On a side note, this accuracy at 13 meters is pathetic.
Left pectoral.
That's the right pectoral. And by the way, the dummy on the right has an extra arrow, which was not seen in the final edit. Now, I do know that the show will edit things out to make things faster, but there is clearly an intention to make this look more impressive than it actually is. I'm convinced that Shigi is a terrible archer. His form is so bad that this is what you expect from a novice archer, not a Kyudo master. Seriously, this shot placement is not impressive. Right target, ribcage. Right target, chest. Left target, shoulder, sword arm. Right target, shoulder, sword arm. Left target, heart. Right target, groin. Left target, groin. Left target, right testicle. And this test of shooting the eyeballs is terrible and fake. So, watch Shige's form. He will use the full 4-finger grip. That is impossible to let go cleanly, and he hits the top of the eyeball. But notice this. This is fake. Notice that they have shifted the position of the first arrow. That is not where it hit. In addition, the eyes have been removed. And furthermore, there is no shot of Shige shooting the arrow and hitting the target in the same frame. It's been cut to show that he's hit the target, but likely it's been artificially shot to look like it's hit the eye. Now for the simulation battle. The samurai does at least use the correct side of the bow. However, he shoots using a Mediterranean draw. The rest of the fight is pretty stupid. Vikings also had bows, but instead we see a dual-wield spear throw. Okay. To give the show some credit, the segment on Attila the Hun isn't that bad. The experts actually do have authentic knowledge. The bows look pretty good, and the expertise of the mounted archer is fairly good. Now, to my understanding, this is actually not how the Huns would have fought. The Huns would have likely used the thumb draw, using bows on horseback. Now, what the expert in this segment uses, I believe, is the Lajos Kasai style of archery. Kasai is a Hungarian horse archer. He basically invented modern competitive horse archery. The technique is somewhat different, but the skill is still very high, and as you can see from the segment, this particular archer is able to hit the targets at speed on a horse, and that's legitimate to my understanding. On a quick side note, the expert for the Alexander team uses the Gastrophenes, which is the belly bow. We do know that this kind of crossbow existed during the classical period, though it's probably not a common weapon. And again, we see a huge skill difference. That's fairly typical of Deadliest Warriors testing. The simulation is somewhat odd. The Hun runs towards the enemy with a bow. Not sure why you would do that. You'll probably regret it in a moment. Attila himself uses a 4-finger draw. That's kind of weird, and that's why you don't charge towards a horse with a bow. And surprisingly, despite the Huns being well known for mounted archery, Attila forgoes his bow and uses a rope. As with many Deadliest Warrior episodes, the equipment is pretty good, the expert is not, and in this case the expert looks like someone who is a complete novice picking a bow up for the first time. I don't say this in a derogatory way, I'm saying this because his form is typical of someone who's never used a bow. He uses a very weak 2-finger draw. In history, the Persians would have used what was called a Persian draw, which we believe to be a variation of the thumb draw, so this is completely wrong. His poor release technique is very evident when you see the way the arrow fails to clear the bow properly. The long distance shooting at the 100-yard target is also ridiculous. I'm not sure if he was trying to compensate for the wind, but he is aiming way off to the left, so when the arrow lands to the left, that should be expected. The simulation is perhaps one of the worst in the series. The bow only gets a small segment, but we see the reason why Eastern archers normally shot with a thumb draw. The actor using the bow is barely able to keep the arrow on the bow on a chariot. Next we have the Commanche versus the Mongol, an episode dedicated to mounted archery. Surely Deadliest Warrior can't screw this up. Oh, who am I kidding? What the hell is this guy doing? Now, to try to explain this, it appears that the person who is modeling the Mongol is attempting some kind of thumb draw. It's very unclear from his hand position. However, the arrow is on the wrong side, and do note that he is a left-handed model. What's happening is that he is trying to use the thumb draw and the arrow will come right off the bow. That's why he's using his index finger on his bow hand to keep it in place. It looks ridiculous, and it is. The first Mongolian expert is billed as an expert archer, and he does appear to be using correct technique, along with stupid sound effects. The second Mongolian expert is quite problematic because, firstly, he's not Mongolian. Jason Nguyen is Vietnamese. I know, I'm a Nguyen. Most likely, he's a Vietnamese American and has nothing to do with Mongolia. Secondly, the way his build is an Asian combat expert doesn't make sense. Is he an expert in Asian combat, or is he a combat expert who is Asian? There are a couple of problems with Jason's appearance. The first is that he speaks in first person as if he was Mongolian.
We don't take from anybody.
The second is that he is used as the archery expert, not the Mongolian, and we don't know if he has any expertise in mounted archery. Jason and the Commanche expert firstly test the bows with the chronograph. There's a problem with this. Firstly, the show never mentions the draw weight of these bows. Bows can be of different draw weight, so you can easily stack the odds. They also record that Jason's shot has a lower velocity. The problem with this evaluation and test is that it doesn't factor in the size of the user. Jason is a smaller person compared to the Commanche expert. A smaller person has shorter arms, a shorter arm span, and therefore a shorter draw. What this means is that he is pulling less weight on the bow at his draw length. The difference in velocity is actually well explained simply by looking at their physical measurements. This doesn't mean the bow is weaker, and when you consider that the Mongolian bows are made from composite materials, it should be substantially stronger than the Commanche wooden bows. The mounted segment is incredibly lopsided. No offense to Jason, but he is the worst horse archer in the show. Unfortunately, he is compared to the Attila expert, who was a trained Hungarian horse archer, and the Commanche expert, who is a champion rider and expert archer himself. Jason, unfortunately, doesn't know about Mongolian archery. He is a Vietnamese American role-playing as a Mongolian, and he doesn't have the right technique or skill to participate in this test. The only reason why the test results were so close is because they're shooting from 5 meters away. The simulation is, as usual, a little silly in its concept. The battle starts with both warriors being mounted and fighting using bows. The Mongolian shooter does not use a Mongolian draw, ironically. That's fairly expected at this level. These aren't trained warriors, just actors. The idea of them engaging at this distance is a little ridiculous. It's a bit too close for combat, and the rest of the fight is not mounted archery at all. The Commanche wins by hiding in a cave. The Mongols reappear in Season 3, Hannibal vs. Genghis Khan, and in this case, the Mongol bow is paired up against an elephant. This is perhaps one of the dumbest matchups in the whole series. I just cannot imagine how the producers decided to pair elephants versus Mongolian bows. In any case, the test is straightforward. The expert is supposed to shoot into a block representing elephant skin and flesh. While the archer himself looks like a fairly strong person, again, they don't use the Mongolian draw. That makes no sense to me. The simulation battle is a bit more complex because it is squad on squad. Do note that none of the Mongolian archers uses an actual Mongolian draw, but those are actors. The tactics are a little strange. The Mongolians would probably have fought on horseback and with bows. They would not dismount unless they were fighting a formation of foot archers. So these tactics don't make a lot of sense. Genghis Khan himself charges the Carthaginian cavalryman with a lance. Okay, that makes some sense, but it's a bit weird again to see why the Mongolians would not use the primary weapon of the bow. Again, the tactics against the elephant are silly. This is a real elephant, so they can't hurt it obviously, but 3 Mongolians standing in front of an elephant trying desperately to shoot at it is weird, especially this part where the Mongolian does a typical horror movie thing. He trips over nothing and gets stopped by the elephant. That's actually one of the funniest things I've seen in Deadliest Warrior. Again, see the Mongolians finally shoot the elephant. The elephant is real, they can't hurt it, so it's obviously CG. They're not shooting real arrows, they're miming it. That's okay, it's stage acting, I can live with that. Despite having the clear advantage of having a horse and plenty of arrows, Genghis Khan decides to dismount and fight man to man, and this again makes no sense. He has a horse, he has a bow, he has arrows, he can easily defeat Hannibal by staying on horseback. He wins the fight anyway, mostly by the virtue of him having steel armor rather than bronze. And that is all of the archery testing and simulations on Deadliest Warrior through all 3 seasons. What do I think of the show in general? It was a fun show to watch, especially when I was younger and I knew less. But that is the problem. That therein lies the problem. The show is not so obviously fake that the average viewer can tell. If this was that obvious, it would be more entertainment, not education. I mean, no, it's not a documentary. The problem is that Deadliest Warrior looks realistic and plausible enough. It plays the stereotypes really well, and it's basically this huge fanboy orgasm with warriors and weapons from different time periods. It's such a fantasy battle that it cannot be believed, but we want to believe it. And that's where this show is particularly dangerous. It misleads viewers into a very skewed, biased, stereotypical view of history. As for the archery, most of the archery is poorly depicted. The experts range from highly trained horse archers to stunt performers to comedians. And when you get to the point where you're hiring a comedian to demonstrate traditional technique, that is scraping below the bottom of the barrel. The testing is very skewed. They want to make it as close as possible. The results are unrealistic, and the simulations don't really show the bow used as it was meant to. And I understand that it's a TV show. It's meant to be high-paced, fast-paced, entertaining, that sort of thing. And it is supposed to be fun. The audience is a very clear demographic. Nonetheless, this show really goes to every possible extent to pull all the history away from the show and fill it with stereotypes. Am I angry about it? No. But as someone who has learned a lot about archery in the past 6 or 7 years, watching Deadliest Warrior now has just shown me directly a lot of what they've done. The show really can't be taken with any amount of credibility. For those who already know the show, you probably already know this, someone beating a dead horse, and this seems like a very easy target to pick on. But for those who are very passionate fans of the series, and when you go to forums and message boards and websites, you see a lot of people actually defend what's happening inside the show. Look, guys, as someone who does archery and I've tried different forms, the stuff you see in the show is mostly bogus. So take it as it is. This is NUSensei. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.